Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this, our third webinar of the year, Bridging Real Estate with the Community. Our first two webinars were very well received and got excellent feedback from the real estate community, and I'm hoping for the same reaction for this one. I'm extremely excited to be hearing from our three wonderful panelists this afternoon, discover their thoughts and listen to their experiences, and learn a bit more about the relationship between real estate developments, assets and local communities. And I will come on to introduce them in a little while. But initially, a little bit about me. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Guy Windsor-Lewis, and I'm the founder and CEO of the Locale Group, a digital property management company that began way back in 2005. When most PropTech startups weren't even a twinkle in their mother's eyes. The group has three sister companies. So the first one is Locale, a property management and communication app. Second one is Locale Life, which is our tenant engagement and well-being business. And last but not least, Locale Look, which creates bespoke digital content to be streamed onto digital screens. I think it's worth saying at this stage, and we were talking about it in what I call the green room, which is the ante-room before we go live, that for Locale, and I think like everyone else, this year has been a pretty crazy 18 months. Crazy across the board in terms of the issues we've all had to face, how we as a company have had to cope, and now how we start the slow process of returning to normal in our work and everyday lives. I was thinking how strange it is that about 18-20 months ago, we were celebrating an award that we got at the Property Week Awards for most innovative PropTech business. And now we've just been nominated for the Best Employer Award at the Estates Gazette Awards coming up in October. And I think we're probably more proud of the latter than we are of the former. I don't know what that says about a PropTech company, but I know it says a lot about the people that have been working here, especially the management here. It's not been an easy ride. Certainly talking to the guys, the panelists before, it certainly hasn't been an easy ride for them. Anyway, back to the webinar and a bit of housekeeping. Basically just a few notes. I want to make sure that attendees are aware that you can send in any questions using the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen. We have a trusty Locale elf called Caitlin, who's in the background on hand to manage all the questions. Thank you, Caitlin, which we'll work to answer at the Q&A section at the end of the webinar. Plus also, please note that we are recording this and that can be available later. We'll also be conducting some polls, and we'll have a section on that when myself and, oh, there you go, myself and the panel will be addressing the results from the poll. So please do get stuck into that whilst you're listening to the pearls of wisdom that are coming from the mouths of our panelists. And then, can we get rid of that? There we go. And then we have a bit of a session overview. So this kind of gives you an idea of the topics that we're going to be covering. And again, if you want to add to these in the Q&A or bring up new topics, then please feel free to do that. And then last but not least, and without further ado, so my notes say, I'm delighted to welcome our esteemed panel of industry experts who will be providing their insights and experience into this unique and rather niche topic. My hope is to hopefully add a little insight myself, but mainly to grill them in a fair but entertaining way. So don't worry, guys, you're in good hands. So without further ado, let's hear from our panelists who are going to introduce themselves, tell us a little bit about who they are and what they do for a living. Should we start with you, Laura?
We can do. So firstly, industry expert. If I am an industry expert, it's probably not this industry. That's the problem. I come from a very different background. I come from publishing. I come from kind of writing workshops, big events, lots of different things, but community building was at the kind of the heart of it, which is kind of why I fit so neatly into placemaking. So I'm in charge of everything kind of tenant engagement. I run Locale Life. We look at kind of getting to know occupiers, getting to know the buildings. We look at kind of building bespoke services that are right for that community. And we kind of do that through kind of traditional alignment with events, but also kind of thinking kind of out of the box and just kind of doing whatever is needed. So that's me in a nutshell.
Brilliant, thank you. Okay, we'll move on to Bridget.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Guy. Great to be here today and join the panel. So by way of background, my name is Bridget Wilkins. I've been working in the real estate and urban development sector for, I think, 13 years now. I'm starting to lose count because it's all evolving and changing almost every day. And my current role is at Built-ID, and we're a social impact tech for good prop tech company where we connect people in the community with real estate developers to inform planning strategies and design, but also move beyond planning to that wider occupier and tenant engagement space. So keen to link up with you, Laura, on a few topics, I'm sure, today. A big passion of mine is ESG and really pushing the agenda of what we can achieve using technology, but also people to deliver some, I think, much needed outcomes that foster more inclusivity and diversity in our communities, particularly at a grassroots level. I'll pass over to Sam.
Cool, over to you, Sam.
Thank you very much. Again, thanks for having us. So I'm Sam Kidby. I'm from Evergreen Reputation. I founded Evergreen about 10 years ago now. We specialize in building communities for places. So we like to work with developers or businesses to really understand how they can best engage to help them either get new people working for them or to make sure that the local community is engaged with the development as it's happening. We kind of looked at, I think the passion for me started with understanding how you can use some of maybe those soft marketing skills in terms of, PR or experiential, and actually really start to prove that they can have real financial results by actually getting people engaged with the location that lasted, why we're called Evergreen Reputation, longer than a kind of a quick burst in the pan. It was something that lasted for a long time and built a kind of true community.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much, guys. I am now going to stop sharing my screen so we can now see the panelists and myself, of course. So first question then, which is what does bridging the real estate with the community mean to the panel? Bridget, are you happy to take this on? This is a broad subject. I appreciate that. So sit back.
I'll have a go, Guy. I'll give my
tell us what it means
10
to you.
And I'm sure exactly we'll open up. I mean, my name is Bridget, or Bridget, depending how you pronounce it. So it's quite ironic that I've moved into this space, literally. I mean, for me, I think it's, we talk about bridging the gap. What is bridging the gap? It's moving from one point to another. And how do you do that? Often with very diverse and sometimes adversarial people on both sides of the fence. So the first thing to really do is to have meaningful engagement, meaningful dialogue, rather than just an element of what sometimes I'm sure we've all seen, that tick boxing consultation, that statutory requirement for a delivery partner to just do consultation for consultation's sake, but actually it's much more powerful and valuable when partners are really doing that two-way engagement piece, which is around connecting with different people and different voices in the community and moving to that other point on the bridge, across that divide, across that gap, whatever you want to call it, together as part of collective action and ultimately delivering some collective and shared wins and outcomes for that. We can go into it much more detail. I think it's about establishing some elements of common ground, common belief. We can all be different, but we can still share a vision for the future. And that might just be around some really sort of simple themes and topics like climate action or affordable living or safer, cleaner, greener spaces. I think, they're topics that I'm sure all the panel can speak to are really powerful in connecting with different types of people in the community, but again, are really powerful and also taking those people on that journey of saying, if you're really involved and invested in this space around creating, for example, cleaner, greener spaces, how can we do it together? And trying to sort of underpin that collective action with, we're in this together, it's a shared vision and it's a much more collaborative approach to, from going to one point to the other.
Lots of interesting points there, which I will come back to you in a sort of, maybe a sort of slightly devil's advocate kind of way, but later on, but I will come back to you. So Sam, in terms of what it actually means, what does it mean to you, bridging the real estate with the community?
I think the first thing that jumps out for me is really around what we're talking about when we talk about community. I think some of the points there that we're talking about is finding common ground is completely the right thing, but understanding the community that you're trying to engage with, because I think, especially in real estate, yeah, we're very focused on the development we're working on and the boundaries that lives within. And I think it's really key. I think there's a literal bridging of some of these boundaries with the local communities who are going to be there through the whole process of a development in its life cycle, from being constructed to being open and buzzy, and potentially generating and attracting new audiences to that area that haven't been to that area and actually aren't the usual audience that those communities are used to. Or, you know, we've worked with clients where we found that actually the local communities feel intimidated by new developments and don't actually benefit from any of the things that are going on, whether it's fountains, whether it's kind of activities, free activities, or even down to employment, and feeling that they have a chance to be able to get a job within these new buildings that have gone up around them. So I think for me, bridging the community, it comes to around how you can really get true engagement. It goes what Bridget said in terms of that engagement where you're really listening to the local community, but combining it with the new audience and the new community that's moving in. There's multiple communities. I think it's very easy to say, oh, the community in real estate. But actually, I think the way to approach it is actually targeting each of those groups and understanding how best to engage them so that they go away with a positive impact from the area and want to come back. And I think, yeah, like we said, the more common ground we can find, the better for making that happen. Okay, interesting. Again, quite a few points that I'll come back to you on this one. And Laura, last but not least, what does it mean for you?
Yeah, so it's quite interesting in the sense that we've come in at the idea that there is already a kind of an opposition ground, that there is the real estate community and there is the local community, and they're at odds with each other, and there isn't a synchronicity between the two of them. And it's kind of like we're kind of trying to find the common ground, that it's not necessarily something that is there from the off. I think also it's kind of important to think about the fact that predominantly we're talking about this in an urban environment. So it's urban communities rather than rural communities. I think that's also something that's kind of worth bearing in mind during the discussion. And I think from my point of view, in terms of community, it's a group of people who share a sense of unity from residing in the same geographical area or having the common cultural heritage that kind of makes them feel like they've got shared goals, objectives, and kind of there's that community activism. So I think it's just the people who work in the building might be part of the local community. So there could already be that kind of that network out there that you need to kind of drill into. But I think both Bridget and Sam are right. It's really at its heart what kind of life is about. I know what these guys are about is asking the right questions to the right people so that everybody's involved, so that you kind of really make sure that you're embedding this new building or this building that's kind of going through renovations or being kind of doing something with it to kind of feel like it really has value within that kind of area.
I agree. I mean, just getting back to one of the two of the points here, Bridget, you mentioned meaningful dialogue as one of the really key things. How do you, as a developer going in, how do you even start that process?
I think it's sort of two easy, if I can use that word, ways to start that process. The first is to start as early as you can. So that could be, I mean, my background's sort of in that development advisory space, and I see a huge opportunity to actually bring forward a lot of the engagement that I'm sure we all do from that sort of stage zero rebar when we're still doing feasibility and viability, because you can then test your designs a lot earlier with the community rather than at the very end when you've got 8 weeks to submit a planning application. So by just bringing
what you're implying there is the developers actually care what the community think.
What was that? Sorry, Guy.
What you're implying there is that the developers actually care what the community
I think they do, and I think we have to assume. I mean, there's always going to be, one person at either side of the spectrum, but we have to give people the benefit of doubt, at least as a starting point. Otherwise, I think we have the wrong mentality of why we're all in this space. And I think developers do care. Developers want to do more, and it's up to us and the people and teams we work with to help them do that and to engage as easily as possible. I'll be really brief, but I think the second thing that we can do, Guy, is create more of a circular feedback loop. So even if we start later on than we would like in that process, creating a narrative to say to people, we asked you a question, you told us this result, and now we're acting on it. We're delivering on the feedback. We're giving you a tangible outcome for what you said you wanted to see. It might only be changing it by 5-10%, but that has a huge value to the community. I think if we can build out that narrative of deliverability, that can be really powerful to the community as well.
I get the feeling that this is a little bit like our business, like Locale, is that we're in the process of digitizing real estate, and saying to people, okay, fine, this is what we're trying to do. Introduce some kind of level of digitalization into your portfolios, into your properties. And we are still very much just scraping the barrel in terms of the numbers that we're low percentiles in terms of the actual numbers of so I'm just going to get rid of that. The low percentile in terms of numbers of schemes in the UK that are actually beginning that process. Everyone is lauding it, everyone is praising it, everyone's saying, yeah, we've got to get on board with this. And I feel that maybe this the actual having a dialogue with the community is still very, very early days. And you've got your protagonists, your early adopters, but the vast majority are only going to get there when they are forced to go there, either by the community or by other forces that are out there.
Or dare say,
I mean, I think it's almost, oh, sorry, Laura, you go.
Sorry, I was going to say, dare say, if they are doing it, they're doing it to tick that box, to show that they're kind of forward thinking, but no one's following up whether or not they've actually put those things in place.
I mean, Sam, you've seen this because I know the people that you've worked with. Is it a tick in the box process, this, or is it something that is generally from the heart and it means a lot to these guys? You're on mute.
Excellent. I knew that was going to happen. I kind of disagree. I think in terms of, from my experience, working in King's Cross in particular for the last 10, 15 years, and there's been a real desire to do it. I think the challenge actually comes with creating real engagement with those communities that you're trying to bring in to make one community. So you are bringing offices and you're bringing new shops and visitors to the shops, but you do have the people that are living there. And I think, anyone in real estate would be mad to think that you've got an audience who would potentially come to your shops and your retail units, your restaurants, sitting on your doorstep, and you wouldn't want to engage them anyway. These should be the kind of the core foundation of any successful development, will be those people who are passing through St Pancras International on an evening, and can actually, rather than go there to get a train, go there to go to M&S, or go there to get some WH Smith, whatever shops, or Christmas presents. But by bringing those in, you start to break down those barriers of what that area is about. And actually, I completely agree with, as early as possible. I think developers do that because they have legally obliged to do and reach out, and the amount of consultations that do take place. I think the real challenge that we have a lot, especially with, I use Somerstown and Caledonian Road as examples that are fairly deprived areas, that actually the access that a lot of the people there have to the information that's giving them isn't necessarily there. The trust with the authorities or things being pushed through their door isn't necessarily there. So I think it's about how best to really let them know. So I'd add, yes, definitely, early as possible, engaging with them in as many ways as possible, but also regularity and consistency then become crucial, because that's how you build trust in the long term. And I think a lot of people, it's not because the developer hasn't tried to tell people in the local area about what's going on, it's because maybe the route hasn't been the right one in that community to really reach them.
Yeah, okay, I get that. I'm just devil's advocate. I'm not just making it up. I don't believe in it. We've seen as you all know, we've seen a sort of a wide sort of variety of things over the years. So it's from the good to the bad to the believers to the tick box exercises. But yeah, I would say on general, not everybody's into this, but there are definitely a growing number of people that are sort of realizing the benefits of it. Plus also there is a legal framework as well. So when we were working with I think we were working with a couple of buildings in London about a decade ago. There were definitely sort of legal frameworks that said you have to have a certain number of people from the local community, and you've got to engage with those guys and reach out to them. So yeah, so that's good. Okay.
And Guy, if I can just add to that,
yeah.
Really quickly. I mean, I think maybe I'm definitely biased. Change is coming, and it's going to happen very quickly. And I have no doubt, if we were to have this panel discussion in a year, maximum 2, the world is going to look very different about our expectations of using digital tools and platforms. And right now, I feel like where the development industry is in adopting technology per se, particularly in the community engagement ESG space, is a bit like where Australia was with sustainability 10 years ago. It was a nice to have. You've always got the early adopters, the market leaders who have the capacity to do things differently, innovate. But until it was legislated by the government, it wasn't going to change,
Yeah.
And I think that, I hope that is coming as part of the planning reform, and that will justify the business case for engaging with communities, just like you said, Sam, earlier on, and in ways that connect with them when they can't access it via traditional means. So
no,
I hope in 12 months or longer. Yeah.
It's a moving piece.
Exactly.
Okay, so moving on to our second theme then. How can technology be used to strengthen relationships between real estate assets, locals, and the wider community? Who wants to start on that one?
I'll happily jump in. Yeah, just make sure I'm definitely not on mute. Excellent.
No, you're not. You're good.
So I think the core role is really around this engagement and that consistency and continued engagement with the communities, because I think you think to when I first started out doing consultations, with the agency I worked with, it was paper, and we all used to go down and write it down and write all the comments down and respond to them. There is now an ability to really engage quite directly and quite quickly with a much bigger audience and ensure that it's out there. But it also means that you're allowed, GDPR rules aside, you're allowed to collect data on the people who are interested in what's going on with the development or the property or whatever's going on. So as long as you're developing a strategy that truly engages and uses a technology to do it, I think that's where technology can really bridge that gap in terms of being able to be a consistent platform that people can trust to get up-to-date local information on what's going on in their local area, rather than walking to the end of the street and seeing a new hoarding and wondering what's going on.
Yeah. Scale, immediacy, transparency, and data. That they've got to be the 3 or 4 key things. And security. I think that sort of technology brings. Laura, what's your thoughts on this?
Well, I agree with Sam. I think the technology can kind of give a platform to a wider network within those communities. It's not necessarily the people who would go to the kind of traditional kind of government-led kind of sessions that kind of take place within the working day, that kind of, if you're working or if you're a busy kind of stay-at-home mum, you can't go to them, you can't drop in. It kind of just gives you the means to kind of check in at your own convenience to see what's happening, and therefore you get kind of more voices involved, and that has to be a good thing.
Yeah, I agree. Gone are the days of the town hall sort of representations where you're all sitting down there and you're trying to get in there at 6 o'clock in the evening.
But they're not gone.
I remember doing that with are they still going, are they? I remember doing that with various sort of residential schemes, and sort of having to turn up to sort of southeast London at 7 o'clock and listen to a sort of a baying crowd of tenants, angry tenants, talking to the management. And then I would set up and go, and we're going to introduce a portal which will give you lots of information. And sort of the anger then sort of was directed towards me, and it was like, I haven't done anything wrong, I'm trying to help. But yeah, it's just, I think that the advance of technology, I know that Bridget and Built-ID, the company you work for, is very keen to sort of promote this and push this and get that scale and transparency out there.
Absolutely, Guy. And I think, just following off from all the points which I agree, fundamentally, by using technology, we're able to engage and connect and hopefully collaborate with audiences in the community, people in the community, demographics in the community that have never before been reached. And it's almost as simple as that. So we call it the silent majority. It's about the 60-80% of people who don't have the time, the accessibility, the mobility to attend those town halls, Obviously, the events of last year accelerated the adoption of digital technology. But if I can be controversial, I think there's always a role for town halls. I think there's always a value in face-to-face, people-to-people engagement. The role of technology and companies like Built-ID is to enable it and accelerate it and help it reach people who wouldn't go to those events in the first place. And that's when it gets really interesting around the demographics and connecting with younger audiences, more mobile and transient work audiences. Sam, you mentioned, at King's Cross, capturing that commuter market who can still walk through and spend 10, 15 quid a day, but might not have a registered postcode there, is so powerful, particularly when done the right way. On average, we connect to about 2,000% times higher level of community members than traditional methods. And that can range between 1,000 to 5,000, 6,000 people per consultation. Just depends on a range of factors. But if you're combining that level of data with qualitative in-person dialogue and combining those two approaches and outreaches, that's very powerful information from a planning perspective, from a viability perspective, from just a people-centric ESG, let's just do things better perspective. We can all put different labels on it, but I hope it's what we see as part of the norm going forward, where technology enables us to connect with different people that we would never connect with, and then bring that into our wider strategy.
You mentioned the demographics here. I mean, again, we are always really nervous about there is a sort of a theme, a main sort of demographic, sort of that middle band between 20 and whatever it is, 55. But are you interested in what the younger ones want, and at the same time, are you interested in what the older ones want, and how do you reach those groups?
Absolutely, and I think it's based on the project, the themes you're trying to sort of question people on, and really who you're trying to connect with. I mean, I'll give an example. We worked with Transport for London on a site in West London, and it wasn't just about age group. Actually, they wanted to connect with, to your point, Laura, stay-at-home mums, because they couldn't get to the consultations they were holding in town halls because they've got kids, and they obviously the ones who are probably one of the most impacted by some of the proposed housing developments around their sites. So by using social media platforms and then different types of outlets on those platforms, we can connect with those audiences. So, at a broad brush, social media allows us to connect with a younger audience, but I think we can get more strategic and more smart than that. And actually, if we want to connect with people above 65, we can do that. With people under 20, we can do that. Where it gets really powerful is if you're doing that at the aggregate level, because I'm sure you can imagine we have a lot of conversations around data. You mentioned GDPR, all that stuff. It's amazing the level of targeting that you can do. But we actually do the opposite and say, well, let's just take a step back and focus at sort of that wider data set level to engage with those demographics. Because in the work that we're doing, it's not really around, Bridget Wilkins lives here, she's X years old and thinks about these three things. It's about 500 versions of all of us added together. And that's when the data gets really powerful.
And I was just going to, my thoughts on that were exactly the same, but I think where data also helps us is being able to analyze the responses that we've had. So, when you've had, you can know whether it's just one person or a group of people. It becomes, the town hall meetings feel very intense sometimes, because it's usually the people who are most upset or don't like the reason that they're there who are going to be loudest. And actually what it does enable you to do, I think, is really find out how much that actually is part of the whole community and is actually a real reason for not liking the development, or actually is it just a certain amount of people, 3 people. We had my good example is always the Lord's cricket ground. I worked there in the past, and we did the floodlights in terms of the planning for floodlights, and there was a core who really were opposed to that, but actually the wider community understood the need for the modernisation of the Lord's cricket ground and understood the reason they were there. And it really helped us manage the process going forward, understanding that, yes, there were concerns from a small number, but actually it was part of not empathy, but people were quite okay with it modernising. It was just understanding that was a smaller group being louder than necessarily the rest of that 80%.
But again, it kind of goes back to kind of taking the time to understand the community and talk to them in a multi kind of channel way. that it's kind of like there is not one tool that's going to engage with everybody, and you need to do things kind of in a kind of a way that is kind of maybe an older generation accept and are used to and have the time to kind of to commit to, and maybe younger generation who kind of are more kind of tech savvy can kind of just do it kind of whenever it fits into their lifestyle. And both are very valid, but they both contribute to kind of to the successful kind of, you know, projects.
So we've talked about the sort of the pre-project and the pre-planning side. So what about when the whole thing is going ahead, and even when the whole thing is being built, is there still the developers, is there still an interest in then maintaining that relationship, or does that then just gently sort of fall away?
I find the ones that we're working with have a very keen reason to continue reaching out to the community and actually putting, it's kind of one of those, putting that effort to get that data and information and engage those people. I think that the biggest mistake real estate can do is kind of do it separately. Is kind of have that beginning bit, collect all the data of people who are interested, and then go to open and start a whole new marketing database of people that we want to go and market. And it's got to be that consistency throughout the development, not seeing it as, oh, we're open, we need to start a new marketing database and build that. It's actually that community, it's a wider community. You want to know what's happening on site, but also might want to know if there's a discount, one of the shops.
So I was going to say, is there then a sort of a relationship then starts with, yes, the community, but also the sort of the retailers, the service providers, et cetera, et cetera?
I think there's got to be reasons to engage. There's got to, all of the developers have to engage with their tenants to get those tenants to engage with the local community, whether it be, we've worked with some to, look at employment opportunities, and actually you get young people in the local area working within a store, suddenly it opens up to the rest of that community. And actually, that's another reason, to look locally, as well as them being on time and not having to travel too far. But, there are real reasons to look for local employment. And I think that's a real thing that developers can work with their tenants to help engage the wider communities.
I do quote the story you told me, Sam, about the King's Cross. I already come back to this with the French speaking classes and things. I don't know if you want to recount.
Yeah, so I mean, for me, that
is the sort of the perfect image here.
And that's through our work with Urban Partners, which is the business partnership for King's Cross, St Pancras Euston, and they basically, a number of big businesses, Google, Guardian, High Speed One, Argent, have all come together to basically look at how we can engage in the local area. And we just noticed, kind of looking around there are a lot of young people who are working in public spaces. And what we look to do, okay, that's something we've noticed, there's a need for some space. So we worked with Eurostar initially to trial opening up some of their meeting rooms after working hours when they weren't being used, so that people could go in there and just use it as a quiet space to do their homework, because they couldn't at home because of overcrowding, family issues. We also had a number of schools whose libraries had to shut because of redevelopment, all that type of stuff. And very quickly we found that it wasn't just the quiet space that they were looking for. And with Eurostar, they very quickly asked one of the guys who was looking after them to help with their French homework. And that's now developed to a point where we have, I think, over 100 volunteers from all our businesses, offering everything from Latin to maths. We have a lot of doctors from Springer Nature, who are one of the serious science publications, going in and helping with physics and biology homework. And we're now not only at Eurostar, but looking to launch it. We're launching in Springer Nature as well as LNER, and also looking at Havas and bringing in some more creative activities rather than just kind of the homework. So it's kind of, we found it a really good way of breaking that barrier down, not only of supporting young people to get into work and help them with their grades, but actually with Eurostar, one of the girls that was there has since then got internships with Eurostar and has gone to university to become an engineer, and Eurostar obviously hoping that she'll come back and work for them in the future. And it starts those conversations, but it also breaks down the barrier of those, especially in young people. And that's a lot where we work, and our focus with Urban Partners is how we work with young people is they look at some of these buildings and they look shiny and intimidating. But if you go into the building, you go to the Habas office or you go to the Google office, suddenly that idea that I don't want to work in an office it goes out the window, because the office in Google is amazing. Go and sit in the cafe and, sit in the restaurant, sit in the meeting rooms, and suddenly it's not what they thought. And that's what we've really found, that it's broken those barriers that people wouldn't have known who Springer Nature was, but actually now quite a few of them want to, are doing sciences and know about that. So again, how can we help them progress through that?
To ask a difficult question, I mean, do you not think some of the nature of these projects is that obviously the community changes, that when you're involved in these things, there is the gentrification process, isn't it? That the people who were there when it was being started are not necessarily the families that kind of are predominant when it's completed or when it's successful.
I think with King's Cross as an example, obviously there wasn't anything really there until they started building everything. And in this case, I'm talking about the kind of communities on the side that sadly haven't changed that much and they are, if anything, kind of the most deprived kind of areas, some of the most deprived areas in London. And what we found is actually they're quite isolated, and that actually they do keep themselves to themselves. And I think that's the breakdown. We've got a community, and those that know and want to go to the shops, or maybe have the money to go to the shops, do. And I think it's actually about how you then make that other group understand that this public realm is for everyone, and actually in the local area, because then they feel part of it otherwise than feeling intimidated. And that's definitely something we've looked to break down through our youth work, just being able to show the young people that it is possible. There are real, this is exciting for you. This development has come to your area. There's loads of things happening, loads of amazing businesses, and you've got great opportunities sitting on your doorstep. Again, it's how you tie those together and actually make sure that, because they'll go in, get a job there, and they'll then go and tell their friend. We had a young man from the Copenhagen Youth Project who worked with Ted Baker to set up his own fashion label, and they went through all the things. And again, it's just helping them not see this area as big corporates, I think. And it's maybe not the real estate world, because I don't think a lot of young people we know even understand the idea of development and corporate. They just see the buildings and the businesses moving in and feel like, right, that's not for us.
Bridget, you get more involved in the resi, am I right in that saying or not? So do you see the sort of the follow through from your clients in terms of sort of the post-construction phase?
So we work over sort of all use classes really, but majority are mixed use with the resi, build to rent, student housing, retirement sector focus, because they're really the growth opportunities right now in the development space. None of our platform's 2 years old since it launched, and unfortunately it takes a bit longer to finish a building in the UK. I think on average it's 5 years for resi and 8 for office. So I look forward to when the shovel hits the ground for some of our first projects. But I think the opportunity is there to keep pushing on what community engagement could achieve. And Sam, you talked about some amazing examples there, and I think that's what's really interesting. So for us, we're not a consultancy; we're a pure tech business. So we don't do the on the ground stuff that, to be honest, I'd love to do because it sounds super interesting and rewarding. And powerful as well. We facilitate and enable those conversations though, and some of those outcomes by trying to connect those audiences. So if I can give an example, we worked on a project, a commercial scheme at Tower Bridge Court, and very simply, we asked the community, we have an element of community space. How do you, the community, want to use the community space? Imagine that. And we had about 450 people respond in about 2 weeks, and the ideas were awesome. It was like, I want to do an upcycling workshop, or I want to do a program around employment for the local youth. We had one guy come forward on the platform who said, I run the cancer outpatient clinic program for guys in St Thomas Hospital, which is about a mile away, about a mile away. And we're looking for some space, 2 days a week to do some rehab programs. Would you be interested? And we're like, oh my God, this is awesome. Because just to your point, Sam, a lot of people see Mr. and Mrs. Developer, PTY Ltd, and go, I can't engage. There's no facilitation. There's no way to engage and break down those barriers. And so we hope that whilst we don't deliver those outcomes, we can connect some of those outcomes as well, because people do want to engage and people do want to connect. I'll just mention one more example quickly. We did a project in Milton Keynes with a really big focus on social value for the developer in their first base. they had like 1,500 people, 1,500 people give their idea for how to use community space. And it was awesome. It was like, I run a Scratch Comedy Club, I run a local volunteering group, and we're like, great, here's the data, here's the email addresses, here's the postcodes, go for it. That's where I think it gets really exciting. And so I'm excited to see as those developments eventually get built, hopefully in the future, hopefully some of those ideas and connections can be.
Speaking of future and future trends and the customer voice, yeah, I mean, so where do you see this going? So I mean, I know, so I'm going to go back to Laura on this one first of all. We obviously deal with a lot of clients who are very much the here and now. Quite a lot of our stuff is to do with sort of the internal sort of tenants and things, but we do have sort of the odd sort of outreach program where we're talking to retailers and things. And are they interested in this kind of stuff? Are they buying into it, or are they? I know it's a weird time. 18 months ago, if I'd asked you the question, you'd have been like, yeah, great. And now you're probably going like, no one's there. But is there uptake? Are the tenants, are the landlords keen?
Definitely, I think they are keen, and I think there are those who genuinely care about kind of supporting the independents in the area and see a true value in that, and see kind of a value in increasing footfall in those kind of businesses, especially after the last 18 months when they are decimated and they need support. And those that have survived have had to diversify. They've kind of they've had to improve their technology rapidly, quickly. They've had to kind of get websites, booking systems. They've kind of they've really struggled. And so yeah, I think there are those who definitely see a value in that. But I think it's kind of also coming from the customer voice side, which is another part of the question. Coming from a different industry, I find it baffling there's even a question. So in any other organization, like listening to your clientele and actually kind of doing market research and hearing what they want to say is just a given. The fact that it's a question is just, to me, it just seems slightly insane that you haven't been doing this, that you haven't been kind of doing surveys, you haven't been doing listening programs, that you're not kind of abjectly just following what your occupiers are wanting to do in those buildings and kind of delivering it. It just seems like a kind of a thing that everyone else would just take for granted, and having the feedback.
I completely agree. I mean, one of my things was does it actually matter what the usage is? So does the same story apply to commercial, to resi? Does it have greater resonance with mixed use, or sort of the elderly, care homes and that sort of stuff? Does this change, or is it the same model?
Who's that question to? I might quickly just answer it. I think it's a balance of getting a big number, but it's not really about a big number. It's about a number that matters. It's that sort of qual versus quant aspect. And I think no matter what the topic is, if it's, as a business, we strategically don't see different, we don't go after resi because people engage more in resi versus commercial. We work on schemes where there is real scope for engagement, and that's just our consistent sort of qualifier for projects. Doesn't matter what sector it is. We have worked on projects where there hasn't been a lot of scope, and you will always get more engagement on projects where there is more scope. It's a really simple principle, but it sort of makes sense. If you can see the direct impact of your input, of your view, of your vote being delivered as part of a plan, even if it's just a sketch plan, you're going to get a good level of engagement. If a developer says, actually, we're just doing this because we have to tell us what you think, you're not going to get a response. It doesn't matter what sector or location it's in. And actually what's interesting is as we move out of London and do more regional projects, we actually get a much higher level of engagement because there's really strong sense of like localism and community identity. So, someone in Milton Keynes, as far as I've seen from our data, doesn't really identify as I'm north or south, I'm Milton Keynes. Same for Bristol and Manchester and Birmingham. So, when you get those communities, that can be quite powerful compared to, say, London, where it's I'm a Camden resident. I'm not really going to think about Southwark or, Lambeth because I go there once a week. So I think that piece is interesting. It's not really around the theme, it's more around the location and the connection to localism that we find interesting for our responses.
Interesting. Laura, do you find that actually the sector, whether it's commercial, residential, mixed use, makes any difference?
I think again, it's kind of goes into how you're kind of engaging with them. I mean, I think it varies, like Bridget was saying, it varies on region and kind of and building. I think it's kind of to say residential, kind of commercial. It kind of again, it comes down to the people occupying those spaces, and they vary, and then therefore the results vary. So it's very individualistic, I think.
Okay, and Sam?
Yeah, I think that point kind of almost boils down to understanding, or real estate understanding, that the customer is the community. Yeah, that for me is it doesn't matter which part of that community, whether it's the residential people that are moving in, or the tenants that are moving in as part of your commercial work, or it's the communities that are sitting either side of you. Yeah, when you're talking about the community, your strategy for engagement has to take into account that there are different people. And I think this is where the property it has and is moving from, it used to build a building and hope someone would come along and rent it, and that was your building with your architecture. And then it was actually the people who are going to rent the building, we'll build it for them. And I feel that we're very much now at a point where real estate has to be looking at almost the customer's customer. So the tenants of their building, or the residents of their building, what do they want? What do the customers of the retail units want within a development that will attract them there? What will people buying a house want to have in the local area, or a flat want to have in that local area? So I think that really understanding that customer and changing it to being that's the community. Thinking again, we started.
I get where you're coming from here, but we talk about customer voice a lot in what we all do and everything else. But at the end of the day, these guys are not professionals. They're not architects. They're not social experts. We're just getting into the discussion, you can tell. But it's really, is customer voice that important at the end of the day?
A long-term,
because the developers are kind of just going to do what they're going to do.
I think you've got to build that trust and engagement, and you don't always have, I'm not saying you have to bow to every kind of wish from the community, but I think what's important is to, I think as Bridget's mentioned, is to show that you've been listening and actually communicate. That's the key for a successful long-term development. And actually, whatever it is, if you're trying to build, actually, if you've got a local community that is bought into what you're doing, you will have a successful development. If you've got a community that is constantly annoyed because of loud music, or the use is completely opposite to what should have been there, you're just asking for a long-term, you're putting blocks in terms of a successful development when you don't need to. Whereas actually understanding what that, for me, I think the future is about this being taken into kind of in planning, in when you're looking at areas, what is the surrounding, and I know it is, what do these people want, what do they need, and what will they respond to?
And also, Guy, you're kind of paying too much attention to what an expert is. What are these? What is the expertise? Just having been in the industry longer. I mean, because if you're not listening to kind of your end user, your end clients, then you're not an expert in it. You might have been kind of 20 years ago, but then everything is changing. People are expecting more, so you need to constantly evolve.
And I agree with that. And I think the only things that will make it change, and what we've seen with the sort of digitalization process over the last sort of 15 years, is either a legal sort of mandate or a financial benefit. And I think, coming back to what Bridget was saying, if you can show that there is a financial benefit to actually listening and incorporating what that customer voice has to say, then there will be movement. And I think what you're all telling me is that actually, yes, there is definite benefit in getting the local community on board way before and involved in that sort of pre-planning process, through to all the benefits that Sam was talking about with the urban
partners.
Fitter thing was to say, that there is long-term benefit with that. So can you actually, with your data, Bridget, can you actually put your finger on a sort of there is a financial benefit here to be had?
Absolutely. I mean, I think if you go back to I think it was Sam, you said, the community is the customer. Let's just change the word to occupier, and then we change the whole conversation around expectations of what a developer would pay to do, engagement rather than consultation, and what they would save to engage with that occupier much earlier on the process. And as someone who used to do those numbers, I can tell you, it pays to do it early, and it pays to do it right, and it's essentially de-risking the speculative nature of real estate development. I mean, that in itself is a multi-billion-pound business opportunity for any of us here. I don't think that's where we're going to get to tomorrow, but I hope that over time, the real estate market recognises the opportunity to look at their customer in a different lens, just picking up all the points the panelists said, and just to connect them and understand them much better in the process to inform their strategy and work with customers, clients, occupiers, communities, whatever you want to call them, as much as possible, both in the initial period, sort of pre-planning, but also I think post-planning is going to be really interesting for the UK and London, and then going into that occupier phase. I can't wait until we've been up and running for say 5+ years, and to sit back and then look at that data and see what we've created, because what we've seen is if we do a phased approach and sort of do a digital campaign every 3 to 6 months, we've done it now for a few clients on 3 or 4 phases for the same project, you actually get a higher level of engagement every time, which is so powerful, because by the end of that process, say in 5 years' time, you could have a database of 20,000 people, with their email addresses. I mean, Laura, like from your background, you can't put a price on that. So why are we arguing the value? Let's just do it, and then someone can tell us what it's worth, and we can, double it.
Okay, we've got a few questions which we'll throw around to the panel. First one is, what concerns do community leaders have with real estate developments? So pretty broad. Sam, do you want to kick that one off?
Sure. I usually find it's the unknown. I think it's just, there's lots of reasons why people are fearful of things, and I think if you're the local community and you hear that there's a big development coming in, there is a worry, and there is a concern about how that will change the community, what they'll be doing to the community. I grew up near the Arsenal Stadium, and the redevelopment of the Emirates had huge impacts on everything around. But actually, how do you make sure that that community feels that they've been listened to, that they're not being trampled on for financial gain? And I think that is a big worry for the community, whether it's valid or not. I just think it's where the reputation of the industry has been. I think it is changing, but I think this is all part of building that trust, so that the dream would be for the developer to have a name that the local community recognises and is delighted to have them building a building or a development in their area, because they know the benefits of that it will be coming out. But that takes a long time to build that reputation and communicate it.
Bridget, would you agree with that?
Absolutely, and I think a lot of this is just around demystifying who the developer is, making them real. We're all people. We all were doing this for a reason. Most of us aren't evil, mean, bad people, but sometimes, we're developers are seen to be that. It's quite adversarial. It starts from an adversarial position. I think you picked it up before, Guy. Oh no, so it was Laura. But I think that's because a lot of people in London have been burnt by changes that haven't really engaged people in the past. I mean, look at East London, look at all Docklands, look at the start of Canary Wharf. I mean, you go back 20, 30 years and you start getting a really, probably for some very valid reasons, justified rhetoric around us versus them. And I think that's where we've got to drive change. That's where we've got to drive a different conversation, a different mindset, a different narrative, a different discourse, whatever you want to call it around. It's not us versus them, it's us together. And I think this might be very controversial for the panel, but post-Brexit and post-COVID, international capital is now looking at opportunities all around the world rather than, say, purely focus on London or the UK. And if we can't deliver, it's sort of the simple mathematics of it, if we can't deliver real estate projects, the money will go elsewhere. And we won't have construction, we won't have jobs, we won't have economic benefits. So we have to look at it as us developers and us community as us. And look at how we can work together to secure capital to deliver projects and that wider benefits to the community. Otherwise, the UK and certain parts of the UK are just going to miss out.
I guess that leads into the next question, really, which is what are the frequent pitfalls developments fall into when entering into a community? So again, I don't know who wants to answer that one, but what are the sort of the frequent pitfalls that people, or the mistakes that people make? Is it not entering into a sort of communication with the communities?
I'd say prescribing what they want. I think that's what's been one of our biggest lessons, is developer thinking this is what they want, this will work, this will work, and actually, it might not be the right thing. And I think that's where you have to listen first before you go out and do anything, because you only have one chance to really make that impression at the beginning, especially. But building that reputation and the trust, and if you go out and do something that they feel is not fitting or not against, that just starts you off on the wrong foot, in my opinion.
Yeah, I can see that. Okay, so let's just wind this. We've got about 4 or 5 minutes to go. So in terms of let's look at what technology and where that's going in terms of what those future trends are. Obviously, we can put out questionnaires and everything else. Do we think it's going to become more intrusive than that, or more invasive, or how do we make it more specific in terms of trying to find those demographics and those groups of people, as you said, Sam, earlier on, sort of those various sort of communities, and which communities you can try to drive at? Is technology going to be able to assist with that, and how do you see that going? What's the future for that side of things? Anybody who wants to answer that, put your hand up. Go on, Bridget. It's going to come back to you.
I mean, I'll just be controversial because that's sort of who I am. I mean, I think if you own a phone and you're on Facebook, we all have to assume that our data is used. If we use a phone to make payments, if we use a phone to connect with people on certain platforms, you have to assume that you give up a level of personal freedom and control of information. So I think it's a bigger conversation around, people's rights and expectations. We can keep it much simpler than that and just go, do you want to be involved in this project, and do you want us to use your data? Yes or no? Click a button, tick a box. Yes, great. No, thank you. Have a great day. Have a great life. I think it's such a massive conversation, data and the ethics, and it's very important because it has been done the wrong way before, and it will be done the wrong way again, I have no doubt. But I think you can make it really simple and just ask people, do you want to be involved and share your information, or don't you? I mean, sometimes I think we make things too complicated. Sam, what do you think?
I think that's exactly the point. I think you've got to give the community that opportunity to be involved. But if they then decide not to be, that's where as a developer or real estate, you have to, well, we gave the opportunity. It was there. You said no, you don't want to put your feeling. The more the community can give feedback, the better it will be for them. And I think that's where it comes down to. And it comes again, that trust for them giving data to developers is the same as having a phone, but it's changing that mindset. I think that this is part of your community as much as your local organizations or Facebook groups that you're on.
Laura, we've been running surveys for the last 18 months, 2 years, especially through the whole of this pandemic. I know we've sort of run stuff with residential, with commercial, with big mixed-use sites, science parks, and all sorts of things. What sort of responses have you had, and how do you encourage people to actually get involved in this?
I'm actually going to skip back to another question. Are there frequent questions occupiers have, and especially in commercial, it's why should I be back in an office?
Yeah.
And that's the biggest challenge, is you've got to be thinking of ways to encourage them to be back in the office that offset the commutes. And that's kind of, a whole different kind of panel maybe, but you need to be thinking of those things that kind of enhance their day and their well-being whilst they're there, that mean that they want to come in. That's the biggest question.
Interesting. All right, I think we are pretty much there, guys. So it just leaves me to thank all the panelists and our lovely audience. Thank you to Laura, Bridget, and Sam. It's been a pleasure having you on. It's been quite lively at times, which is good. It's what it's all about. So thank you again, everybody, and we will catch up with you in the near future. All right, cheers then. Bye-bye.
Thanks a lot. Great to connect.
Cheers.
Cheers. Bye.